Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel Boat Rockers. I'm Chris Logan and I want to have just a short little word with you about what I believe God is doing with these NFL protests. And I think that God is really working amongst His people in this, and I think He's working it out to their good and according to His purpose. And I think what He's doing is He's leading us as His children to exercise ourselves rather unto godliness. Because it has profit of, not only in this world but also in the world to come. And the kind of exercise that I think He's wanting us to do is we're learning how to take baby steps, and we're learning how to take a stand. We're learning how to take steps, and we're learning how to take a stand. And God is basically saying, look, if you can't take a stand, when they're stepping on your flag, and they're basically disrespecting your veterans and everything that is good and moral that the United States stands for, and I'm talking about what the forefathers established. I'm not talking about everything that America is today, but and ultimately, everything that is good. Then how will you take a stand later on down the line? And when there's a lot more at stake than just giving up entertainment. If you can't give up football now, then how are you going to give up eating or your family later? If you're asked to renounce Christ or whatever, how are you going to take a stand then? If your life is on the line. And I think it's kind of what God is doing here. He's calling His people out. He's saying basically, come out from among them and be separate. Touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, says the Lord. And these NFL protests, there's something dark and sinister going on in the NFL, I believe. Because everything that league has become to stand for is really just, anti-God. It's globalism, and when I saw Alejandro Villanueva, the Pittsburgh Steeler, that came out in the locker room, and he was the only one out there. He was a hero. He became a hero overnight for doing that. But he completely changed his story the next day, and that kind of leads me to believe that there was some powerful forces. There was some powerful people that had a talk with him. People said, his coach chewed him out. Well, I think it was a lot more than that. That was a nail that they saw sticking up, but they drove it right back down. And when I saw Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys kneeling there at the, in the middle of the field, it was very disturbing. It's like they were bowing the knee to Baal. And in the Book of Kings, Elijah is, he's battling with the prophets of Baal, but he tells the people, he says, look, if the Lord is God, then serve Him, but if Baal is God, then serve him. And he says, he asked the question, how long are you going to halt between two opinions? And that's the question we as Christians got to ask ourselves right now. How long are we going to halt between two opinions? Well, I think God is asking us to take a stand. He's asking us to, come out from among them, be separate, give up your football. And to a lot of people, that would be a huge deal. It was to me. I did not want to give up my football. I was a huge Atlanta Falcon fan. I could not wait to get home from church and, the game start. My heart would start to pound. It's like it gave me something that I did not get anywhere else. It gave me an adventure. It gave me a quest. It gave me, a thrill. Just like a heroin addict would get a thrill. It was really that intense for me. But, I had to give it up. Because I see what's going on with the NFL and these protests. You could choose any other time to make your protest or your message, but why are you choosing during the national anthem to do so? You could do it any other time. This has, what's going on, this racial inequality you say is going on, has nothing to do with the veterans, and it's got nothing to do with the Star Spangled Banner. And I remember, the last day I watched football, it was about 2 weeks ago. The last game I watched was basically the Bengals and the Packers, but I watched the Falcons before that, the 1 o'clock game. But I remember, after that Bengals-Packers game, I just had a sour taste in my mouth about it. I was angry and I was upset. And because my father fought for this country, and he was a Vietnam veteran. And usually I watch, from 1 o'clock till late that night. I watched the Sunday night game too, but I didn't want to watch the Sunday night game. I just turned the TV off. I didn't watch the Monday night game, and I was like, you know what, I'm done. Because I was angry and I was upset, and I was just, I can see what's being said here, and I can see what the NFL is doing. But the question I want to ask right now is, will you give up your pleasure to become God's treasure? And The portion of scripture that I want to point out is in Malachi chapter 3 and Malachi chapter 4, which is a very short chapter actually. But in Malachi chapter 3, God is talking about making up his jewels, and a jewel, before it becomes a jewel, has to go through great pressure. And I believe that's what God is going to put his people through. He's making up his jewels. You've always heard about how a diamond has to, is just really a lump of coal that withstood itself under pressure. And I think that's what God's doing right now. The pressure's going to be more and more. I mean, you think giving up football is going to be a big deal. Wait till they ask you to give up your family. Wait till they ask you to give up your life. Wait till they ask you to give up eating. If you can't give up football now, how are you going to give up that later? So, man of God, woman of God, child of God, we need to heed this. God is asking us to give up things now because he's probably going to be asking us to give up a lot more later. And if you can't give up something as menial as football or entertainment, then how are you going to give up a whole lot more later on? So we got to exercise ourselves rather unto godliness. When I say exercise ourselves, what I mean by that is don't expect yourself to lift 500 pounds if you can't lift 100. You can't make a big stand later on if you can't give up a simple pleasure now. And so we have to exercise ourselves rather unto godliness. And I want to read this out of Malachi chapter 3, and it's verse 14. You have said it is vain to serve God, and what profit is it that we have kept his ordinance and that we have walked mournfully before the Lord of hosts? In other words, what profit is it, God, that we've served you? We've went through, the trials and the tribulations, we've went through, the trouble like Jesus talked about, in this world you shall have trouble, but be of good cheer, I've overcome the world. We've went through all this, and what profit is it, God? I mean, it seems like it's all for nothing sometimes. And that reminds me of what Asaph, asked or what Asaph said in Psalms chapter 73. I've cleansed my heart in vain, because the wicked are prospering, the wicked have more than they could want, heart could wish. But basically, Asaph later on in that psalm said, but then I went to the sanctuary, then I went to the house of God, then I saw their end. And that's what we got to have here. We got to have an eternal mindset. We've got to look at the big picture of what God is doing here. We can't just live in the moment, and just be carried about with every little wind of doctrine. But he went on to say in verse 15, and now we call the proud happy, yea, they that work wickedness are set up, yea, they that tempt God are even delivered. Just like Asaph said, the wicked are prospering. And Jeremiah said something to the same extent, and then God basically pointed something out to him, and he said this. He said, how can you run with the horses if you can't even keep up with the footmen, or something like that? And basically, how can you do the big things if you can't do the small things? If you can't give up football now, like God is really putting it on the hearts of some people to do, because he's showing some Christians what's going on with this NFL. And, we don't want to give it up, and they don't want to give it up. But, if you can't give that up, then how are you going to give up something much greater later on? So continuing on in Malachi, in verse 16, then they that feared the Lord spake often one to another, and the Lord hearkened and heard it, and a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord and that thought upon his name. Are we thinking upon his name, or are we thinking about the ball team? Are we thinking about what's on our mind? The Bible says, if you then be risen with Christ, set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. And one translation says affections. Set your affections on things above and not on things on the earth. A lot of people have more passion for their ball team than they do for God. I've been there. I'm going to admit it. I've been there. And do you have more passion for the Alabama Crimson Tide or for God? Do you have more passion for the Dallas Cowboys or for God? Do you have more passion for fill in the blank than you do for God? We have to examine ourselves and ask ourselves that. And so, in verse 17 it continues, and they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels, and I will spare them as a man spareth his own son that serveth him. We got to serve God now. We got to serve him. Then shall you return and discern between the righteous and the wicked, between him that serveth God and him that serveth him not. We got to discern that now. We got to discern. We have to discern. And I think it was Spurgeon that said, discernment is knowing what is the truth and knowing what is almost the truth, or something like that. And, some things can look so innocent sometimes And a lot of people will look and say, well, it's just a ball game. It's just a sport. How can that be? But you got to look at the deeper picture of what's going on here. And continuing on, starting in chapter 4, for behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven. That day's coming. And all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble, and the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. God's going to do a complete work. He's going to make a full end. But unto you that fear my name, do we fear his name? Do we fear his name? We got to fear his name now. You know, every knee shall bow. Every knee shall. You want to talk about bowing? You want to talk about kneeling? Every knee's going to bow. You know, so you football players that are kneeling, just keep practicing, boys. Just keep practicing. You know, because every knee's going to bow and every tongue's going to confess. But we got to fear his name now. You know, not just at the at judgment. Everybody's going to fear God, but we got to fear him now. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and you shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. And you shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day that I shall do this, saith the Lord of hosts. Remember ye the law of Moses my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb, for all Israel with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And I believe that was John the Baptist, because Jesus said, and Elijah has already come, and he's talking about basically John the Baptist, I believe. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Now he's talking about John the Baptist there. But also I believe that God right now is in the business of turning the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to the fathers. And a lot of fathers are much more into their ball teams than they are their children and their wives. And you've heard that term, sports widows. Somebody whose husband spends more time with their favorite ball team than they do with their family. And I think God is crumbling and crashing and imploding this NFL. And I think college football is not too far behind either, by the way. But the NFL is falling apart. And it's a way of turning the hearts of the fathers to the children. So fathers will start to focus more now on the things that really matter and get their focus from the distraction that is football, and start to turn their hearts and their focus toward their children, and the heart of the children to the fathers. And families can be a cohesive unit again. And I think it's a message to the people of God, not necessarily to the world, but to the children of God. Today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your heart. If you hear this message. And God is saying to the children of God, he's saying to Christian men, get your head out of the football, get your head out of the man cave, and get your heart back into your family. Where is your affection? Set your affection on things above, not on things of the earth. Start being a father. Start being a husband. Start being a leader. Start being a teacher. Start being an example. An example. Make those sacrifices now. We got to make sacrifices now, because God's going to ask us to make much bigger sacrifices later on. And don't sit here and tell me that you're going to stand up to the Antichrist and refuse the mark of the beast when you can't even give up football now. And so I'm going to close it by saying this. Will you go through the pressure? Will you give up your pleasure to be his treasure? And I hope you will. And that's all I got to say for right now. And I hope this word blessed you. And like or subscribe to my channel here on YouTube, Boat Rockers. I'm Chris Logan, and God bless and Godspeed.